to welcome Ms. Katrina Kelly and Mr. Michael Burke. Ms. Kelly is an Associate Director of Financial Aid at Westchester University. And Mr. Burke, we've been working with for umpteen years. I mean, I think we even go into the decades now.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand it over to Katrina and she'll start us out.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Katrina. I am the Associate Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships at Westchester. I'm going to give you a high-level kind of overview of the financial aid process. So, show of hands, who is the parent of a graduating senior? Okay, almost everybody. Who has completed the FAFSA? Okay, good. So some of this is stuff that you will already know. The end, I promise I will go a deep dive into scholarships at the end, okay? If you have not completed the FAFSA yet, the first thing that you need to do is create a Federal Student Aid ID, an FSA ID. It's very important that both the student and the parent have their own unique FSA IDs. This FSA ID will be yours for life, basically. So if you have other children who will be going to school at some point, that FSA ID will be yours for all of your students. It's important that you keep it with an email that you have access to and that you use a password that you'll remember. Because if you ever take out a Parent Plus loan or anything like that, this FSA ID will be how you log in, how you keep track of all of that information, all of that good stuff.
Did you say Parent Plus loan?
Yep, Parent Plus loan. I'm going to talk about, yep, no, you're good. So the FAFSA did open on December 1st. Sorry, that's a typo. And so schools have begun getting this information. Most schools will send out financial aid award letters between now and like March. So certain schools might have a priority deadline. For example, Westchester has a priority deadline of March 15th. That deadline, it's not like a hard deadline, but it's just to say that if you do the FAFSA first, you'll be considered for any additional grant and need-based aid. So usually the sooner that you do the FAFSA, the sooner you will get a financial aid award letter and potentially get additional funding. PHEAA does have a deadline. It's a hard deadline to complete the FAFSA, and that is by May 1st. And that's to be considered for any Pennsylvania state grants, and my colleague here will talk more about PHEAA extensively a little bit later. The FAFSA does use the prior tax year. So for the 25-26 FAFSA, which starts fall 25, does use 2023's tax data. Now, I will say we recognize in financial aid, and I can speak for all financial aid administrators here, we recognize that your financial situation from 2023 might not be reflective of where we are currently in 2025. If that is the case, you should contact the financial aid offices of the schools that your student has applied to, because each school may have a appeals process, and that looks a little differently between schools. Westchester is a one of the PHEAA schools, so it's a state school. I've worked at community colleges, and I've worked at private institutions. For Westchester, the process is you contact our office, we set up an appointment, and we talk about finances, and then we might potentially update the FAFSA information using current financial data, which could potentially get you additional funding. But again, each school might have a different process and might request a little bit of a different information.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, sure.
When you say set up an appointment, you mean the parent sets up an appointment, or
Yes,
the child, or both?
So typically at Westchester, we require both initially, because there's FERPA, which is a privacy law. It's a federal law. The student would have to grant access for the parent for us to have a conversation. So that's usually the initial step. But when we're talking about parent finances, I personally do want the parent to be there, because I'm asking specific tax data, right, that the student probably wouldn't know. Okay, so the FAFSA has changed over the past couple of years. in terms of who is the parent on the FAFSA and how students complete the FAFSA. So students have to start the FAFSA, and then the parent is listed as a contributor. So in the cases where the parents are divorced, which parent goes on the FAFSA? For 25-26, whichever parent provides more financial support for the student. In previous years, it used to be whoever primarily took care of the student, and now it is whoever bears more of the financial burden as the person who's on the FAFSA. In the case where a parent is divorced and has since remarried, both that parent and the step parent have to be on the FAFSA as contributors.
What if they're still married? Is it still the one that is producing more of the money?
So if both parents are married, both parents are on the FAFSA.
Thank you.
And the same thing if both parents are not married but living in the same household, then both parents have to be on the FAFSA. The FAFSA now has an introductory video to talk about who the parents are, and they have really helpful little slides to identify who the contributors are, which parents need to be on there, and things like that. So again, there is a parent wizard. So if the biological parents are remarried, then the step parent and their income have to be included on the FAFSA. If two parents, how they file their taxes. So if student's parents are married, if you're married, and you filed your taxes as married filing separately, both parents have to grant access to the IRS to import the data to the FAFSA. So what if a student can't get their parents' information because they have special circumstances, whether the student now lives with a grandparent or was legally adopted? If a student was legally adopted, the legal adoptive parent would be on the FAFSA, but if it's a case of the student is now living with grandma or living with an aunt or something like that, that person would not be on the FAFSA unless they were legally adopted. In those cases, that's considered a special circumstance, and they should contact their financial aid office to help guide them through processing this FAFSA. Parents can also refuse to add information to the FAFSA. If that's the case, then the student would not be considered for any federal grants. They would only be eligible for an unsubsidized student loan. And I'll talk about what the unsubsidized student loan means. But if the student, if the parents refuse to provide any financial information, that is all they're eligible for. So in addition to the FAFSA, some schools require an additional application called the CSS profile. It does cost money to complete the CSS profile, and it's $25 for the first school, $16 for all other schools. While you provide tax information to the FAFSA, the CSS profile also requires tax information. And unlike the FAFSA, they require bank statements, current records of your savings, stocks, bonds, things like that. There's over 400 schools who use the CSS profile. Some of them are listed here. You can't really see it too well, but Bryn Mawr is a big one. Swarthmore College is a big one. UPenn is a big one. Some Haverford College. A lot of schools do use this, so if your student is applying to any of these schools, they may be required to fill out an additional application.
How do we get a list of those schools?
So if you Google CSS profile, you'll be able to see the list of schools. I just took a screen grab for all the schools in PA that require the CSS profile.
That's all I would need. How could we get that somehow?
So my PowerPoint was printed. You should have a copy of this PowerPoint, so it has the list of all the PA schools.
Okay.
But if you just Google the CSS profile, it should show up, and then you can just select, the filter tool and do PA.
Okay, thank you so much.
So once you've completed the FAFSA, what does all of that mean? What types of aid can I get? There are a couple different types of aid. So there's merit-based scholarships, financial need-based scholarships, and then loans. So merit-based scholarships are based off of high school GPA, SAT, ACT scores, things of that nature. They're typically awarded by an admissions office. So they're reviewed at the time the student applies to the university. Every school that I've ever worked at, merit-based scholarships have always been done through admissions, not through financial aid. They're independent of the FAFSA. To be considered for a merit-based scholarship, you do not have to complete the FAFSA. Now, I will say at Westchester specifically, we have donor scholarships, and a lot of those donor scholarships might not be need-based, meaning they're not looking at your FAFSA, they're not looking at how much you're making, not looking at their tax information, but completing the FAFSA is a requirement. So I always suggest that even if you don't think that you're going to get anything from the FAFSA, meaning you're only going to get loans, you're not expecting to get any grants from federal grants or state grants, still do the FAFSA, because a lot of scholarships do have a requirement sometimes of just the FAFSA being completed. Financial need-based. So there's different types of financial need-based grants. There are certain institutional scholarships and grants. So like I mentioned earlier, at Westchester, we do have a financial need-based grant. How that is calculated is if a student receives federal and state grants, and then they accept their loans and they still have like a balance that they would potentially owe, Westchester does do and looks at each student and their FAFSA information to see if they may qualify for need-based grants. So that is a combination, our need-based grants, Westchester specifically, the FAFSA and their high school information. So if they have a high GPA and they have a high need, they're probably going to get a financial need-based grant. For federal grants, in order to be eligible, oh, I'm gonna get there. For federal grants, the federal Pell Grant is the big one. So with the FAFSA updates, actually, more students have become eligible for a federal Pell Grant than ever before. The maximum federal Pell Grant for this year is $7,394. For context, the federal Pell Grant covers Westchester's tuition and fees completely. Just the Pell Grant alone. And that's what happens with a lot of PHEAA schools as well. If you are eligible for the maximum federal Pell Grant, your tuition and fees are pretty much covered by just that federal Pell Grant.
Is that for 1 year?
That's 1 year.
Okay.
And then you reapply.
Yes, you do the FAFSA.
Okay.
Do the FAFSA every single year. To be eligible for the federal Pell Grant, you have to typically make less than 225% of the federal poverty guidelines. So if you are a family of 4, you have to make under $70,000 combined between both parents. To be eligible for a PA state grant, it's a little different, and I'm sure my colleague will go into what that entails. Federal loans. Well, I'll talk about work study first. So federal work study. So how work study works is it's not paid to the student's bill, so it doesn't come off of tuition or anything like that. Work study works by a student could be awarded work study, and whatever, if they get a job on campus, that is where their paycheck comes from. So for example, at Westchester, if a student gets a job on campus, they could potentially be awarded $2,000 in federal work study funds. That means that up to $2,000 of their paycheck in total would come from the Department of Education. So 75% of a student's paycheck comes from their financial aid. The other 25% typically comes from the department's budget. Now, each school is different. At my previous institution, when I worked at Widener University, work study was assigned to students. So at Westchester, that's not the case. Students have to have a resume, a cover letter, and go through an interview process to get a job on campus. So each school does work study a little bit differently. If your student is interested in working on campus and they have work study, I would recommend it. If they're not awarded work study, that's not to say that they can't work on campus. There are many positions on campuses that is fully funded by the department, but it all depends.
Specific jobs or like school jobs? Like
Yeah. Oh, so yeah. So for example, we have 16 work study students in the financial aid office at Westchester. Each office has their own. Now, I will say the pay is different for each different office. We have work study students who work in our IT department. They're typically paid a little bit higher because they have to go through training, specialized training to help with like the call center, things like that. If they're working in any of the call centers, helping with like general information, they're typically paid a little bit more because they have to do training. We also have students who work in our student union who just look at IDs. So there's no additional training required for that really, so the pay scale is different. But at Westchester, we have over, I would say at least over 1,000 students, student workers at any given time. The other need-based aid, and I'll go more in detail about federal loans in a second, so I'm gonna hold off on that. And then I did mention the federal Parent Plus loan and private loans. So here's some of the need-based grants that I talked about. There's the federal Pell Grant. The minimum right now is $761,395. If a student is eligible for a federal Pell Grant, they might be eligible for the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, SEOG. They're usually tied. The amount of SEOG funding could vary between schools because the school does kick in a portion of it. So if a student is eligible for a Pell Grant, they could potentially be eligible for SEOG, but at Westchester and when I worked at Widener, that was first come, first serve. So filing the FAFSA first, this is a perfect example of getting funding quicker. Then there's the TEACH grant. So the TEACH grant is if a student is thinking about becoming a teacher when they graduate. They could potentially be eligible for this grant. Now, it could potentially become a loan. So the TEACH grant, students basically have to sign on saying that after they graduate, they agree to work for 6 years in an underserved population or school district. If they do not do that and do not hold up the terms of the agreement of the TEACH grant, it could turn into a loan. And it would be an unsubsidized student loan. So I always tell students that if they're considering becoming a teacher and they're looking at the TEACH grant, that they really need to come talk to a financial aid counselor and really sit down and think, you know, you're 18 now, you might not know what you're gonna do for the next like basically 12 years. So to really think carefully about that. And then again, merit-based and need-based scholarships and grants. Each school does things a little bit differently, but overall, merit-based scholarships are done by the admissions office at the time of application. Okay, so federal loans. There's the direct subsidized student loan and the unsubsidized student loan. So the difference basically is the subsidized student loan, the government pays the interest while the student is in school. It does not begin accruing interest until 6 months after graduation, whereas the unsubsidized student loan does begin accruing interest from when it's accepted. The current interest rate for the direct unsubsidized student loan is 6.53%, which is about the national average for federal loans, or excuse me, for just private loans in general. The amount of the subsidized and unsubsidized student loan can vary. If a student does the FAFSA, they're automatically eligible as a first-year student for up to $5,500 in federal loans. How those loans are allocated depends on financial need. So if a student has financial need, they could be eligible for up to $3,500 in a subsidized student loan and up to $2,000 in an unsubsidized student loan for their first year. Now, as they can complete classes, so their second year, they could be eligible for up to a total of $6,500, and then their third and fourth year, up to $7,500. So a student could potentially be eligible for an additional unsubsidized student loan if their parent applies for a Parent Plus loan and is denied. And I'll talk about the Parent Plus loans in a second. So the Federal Parent Plus loan, that is a federal loan that would be in the parent's name for the student. It's important to note that the Parent Plus loan can never be transferred to the student. It's, as far as the Department of Education is concerned, it is the parent's responsibility to pay back. Now, if you and your student have an agreement, like, hey, after you graduate, you got to pay for that, that's between you and student. As far as the Department of Education is concerned, it is the parent's responsibility, and if the parent does not pay, the parent will be put into default, not the student, for the Parent Plus loan. The subsidized and unsubsidized student loans are in the student's name. The parent does not need to co-sign, the parent doesn't need to do anything for these. Only the Parent Plus loan. Now, the Parent Plus loan interest rate is a little high right now. It's 9.08% interest. Now, this is bullet point 10 reasons you deserve a scholarship. And I will say, as I know some of their reviewers, be wacky for their scholarships. So they do have a lot of scholarships. They also have a search function too, but Unigo scholarships are really good. So and I'll end on this, 5 tips for financial success. Look for the free money first, obviously. So apply for scholarships now and don't stop the application process. So, as soon as a student is accepted, keep going. We love in financial aid, a lot of students are scared to come talk to us. I promise we don't bite, but I love when students come to my office and say, I don't know why I'm here, my mom sent me, I don't know. I love those conversations because then we can look at the student's account and see, hey, well, what might you be eligible for? Don't be afraid to go to our offices and just say, I don't know what I don't know. Can you help me? To look at other opportunities, because each school does have scholarships that comes up and different opportunities. So definitely come talk to us. Know your specific deadlines. So I mentioned Westchester has a priority deadline. PHEAA has the May 1st deadline to complete the FAFSA. We have scholarship deadlines. Contact your schools to see what deadlines they might have. And then fill out the FAFSA every year and compare your financial aid offers carefully. And then make sure that you have a plan for when the bill comes out before you put in a deposit at a school. Does anybody have any questions?
How do scholarships affect taxes? Like, is it like money that, is it considered money that the student has like earned and they have to declare it on their taxes, or how does that happen?
So it depends on the scholarship. So if it's a scholarship through like the university or something like that, they're not taxable. Now, if it's a scholarship that is paid directly to the student and it is over a certain amount,
What is that certain amount?
I can't think of it off the top of my head. I believe I want to say $6,000.
Okay, so it's different than like with gift taxes, like that's like $18,000 or something.
Yeah, it's different.
So it doesn't count as a gift. Okay.
Yeah.
Continue.
I'll email you the actual scholarship tax information if you'd like to supply it. I just can't think of the amount off the top of my head. I'm sorry, where was it going?
Scholarships that are paid specifically.
Oh, specifically to the student and don't go to the school, they are taxed differently. Now, if it's made out to the student and the school and it's used for tuition, you'll usually see that on the 1099-R from the school, not from, or 1099-T from the school that you would use to file your taxes with.
For juniors, when is the tax year that I have to use?
For the FAFSA, for juniors, 2024. Any other questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So sometimes parents will say, we received a scholarship offer of X amount of dollars from one institution, and another institution gave us this amount. So is that a negotiable item?
Yeah, so yes and no. I will say, so for example, at Westchester, if you apply to Westchester and say Kutztown, and Westchester gave you 2,000, Kutztown gave you 3. You could provide that offer to Westchester to see if we would reconsider for additional funding. Because we're a state school, we will typically compete with the other state schools. We can't compete with the private schools, so like if you send us an award letter from say Widener's costs are so far different than Westchester's that we can't, there's no way that we can compare those. However, Widener, if you applied to Widener and Widener gave you 20,000, but Villanova gave you 30,000, you can compare award offers. It depends on which office does those. So at Westchester, the financial aid office, we review those in conjunction with admissions. When I worked at Widener, the admissions office did it solely because they're merit-based awards, right? So it all depends. The moral of that story is just ask. Contact the financial aid office, contact the admissions office to see. I know for a fact the other PASHE schools do the same thing. So if Westchester gave you 2,000 and your student really wants to go to like Slippery Rock, we compete with each other. But we can't compete with the private schools. And the private schools are competing with each other too. So that is typically negotiable up to a threshold. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Michael Burke, and I'm a representative with the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, or commonly known as PHEAA. We manage the Pennsylvania State Grant Program, which is our flagship program here in the Commonwealth. And then we have a bunch of other grants and scholarship programs that we also manage on behalf of the Commonwealth as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about the state process and how that works. As Katrina went through, the FAFSA is really the first thing that a student needs to do because the state uses that information as well, and I'll walk you through all that process. This is my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. The best way to reach me is via email because I do a lot of traveling. I'm on the road. And if you, at any time, whether it's after this presentation, when you're actually applying for financial aid, when you get those offer letters from the school, if you have concerns or issues or whatever, please feel free to use me as a resource. I'll be more than happy to assist you and help you out if I can. Copies of our presentations are over here on the table, so if you didn't pick up one, please do. And then I'll also be sending information basically that Katrina and I were presenting with you tonight is in this PA Student Aid Guide. It's a great resource, so if you didn't pick this up, please do so because it does walk you through the whole financial aid process, aid, additional aid, forms you need to complete, deadline date, resources, things like that. Please don't pay anyone to the FAFSA. It's complete and even getting easier. This year, for 25-26, the federal government really cleaned up the application and the process beautifully. So, how about the application process? That's pretty easy, but just the processing of it. So if I can, before I get into the state stuff, I just wanted to add a few points to what Katrina said for you to consider as well. One of them being, since I know we have a junior family here, the most important thing is for my seniors, anyone who is a senior now, they need to fill out the 25-26 FAFSA. And that, as Katrina said, that became available actually November 21st of this year. And they need to complete that to be considered for aid for the 25-26 academic year when they will be entering college. As Katrina also said, you have to reapply for financial aid each year. The application is good for 1 year. For my junior families, they would be filling out the 26-25 FAFSA. That will be available October 1st of 2025. And again, as Katrina confirmed, you do need to use 2024 income form. The FAFSA is very income driven. It looks at income before it looks at anything else. Some students and families may need to provide some asset and investment information, but it will tell you it's a smart application, so you want to do it online, because as you, the parent, and the student are answering questions, if there is information that doesn't apply to the student or you, the parent, you won't even be asked those questions. So it's really, really good. Plus, there's a lot of benefits and resources built into the online application to assist and help you. Every single question that is presented to the student and the parent, there's a little icon with an eye in it that gives you additional information and guidance of where that information comes from and what we use that information for. FAFSA, everything's whole dollars, no cents. You do have to answer every question that is presented to the student and the parent. So when you look at that question, because a lot of people get a little crazy over this and they think too much about it. You look at the question, you say, it doesn't apply to me, I don't have that, then all you want to do is put in a 0 in there and move on, okay? If you miss something, it's good application, because I said it's a smart application. You'll get a little error message saying, oops, you missed this question, please go back and respond to it. If you did respond to it and it says the answer doesn't look right or whatever, if you look at it, it is the correct answer, then all you need to do is move on. Okay, but it's very easy. For the online application, it takes the federal government no more than 72 hours to process that information, and that is the only way the schools that the student is listed on the FAFSA and the state gets that information. So that's the other point I wanted to make. So when the student is applying for financial aid, they do not need to be accepted or applied to the school. So for my junior student, when the FAFSA becomes available in October, they can go out there and complete that form right away. They want to list every school on there that they potentially think that they might be attending or looking at. They can always add schools afterwards. They can take schools off, but you do not need to be apply to the school or be accepted to the school before starting this process. You had a question?
Yeah, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Some of the questions are around parent and student investments, money, what they have assets. And knowing that, well, whatever you put in is obviously going to generate an algorithm of whatever you get. So is there like fact checking? I don't know if you guys know, because assets are sometimes hard to, with a minor, or it's hard to really know what money the parents have and what's considered an asset, so on and so forth, and that will dictate how much you're granted. So is there any fact checking behind the scenes? And I don't know how they would do that. I mean, I know there's a connection to IRS in your tax return.
Right.
So I think that has some income, but I don't know what.
Well, basically, on the FAFSA, the majority of the financial information we need really is coming from your tax return if you filed taxes. If you didn't, then you're going to indicate that, and if there are any other financial information that it needs, it's going to present that to you. You would answer that. With regards, and the same thing with income, it's looking at prior year. Now, assets are a little bit different. So assets, you have to provide the net value of that asset as of the day you're completing the FAFSA, because assets go up and down every single day. Okay, so the day you're filling out the FAFSA and getting ready to submit that, whatever assets that are required on the FAFSA, and that's a really good question, and that's why I usually tell students and families, if you are asked for asset and investment information, there's that little icon which gives you guidance, because there are certain assets that should not be included on the FAFSA. CSS profile is a little different. It's going to ask for a whole lot more information than FAFSA does. So you want to make sure you're giving FAFSA the information that it is. But, again, it'll tell you what is required. And then in terms of going back and, determine whether that's correct or not, the student, I would say, could be, or the application could be selected for verification if something doesn't look right. And then the school will work with the student and the parent with regards to, verifying that amount if need be. Like sometimes, when I was in aid, years ago and working at different schools, you know, a student was selected for verification, and that process has changed a lot too. We had to go in and verify that the information they provided was correct. You know, and sometimes we'd see things like there was a lot of interest income that a family reported on their tax return, but there were no assets to support that. So many times we had to go back and we had to say, we see this, you know, but we don't see any asset. And at the time, family would say, yes, I had an asset of X, but, you know, my house blew away in a storm, or whatever the case may be, and we had to use those assets in order to rebuild our house or something. You know, and the school will take that into consideration in terms of that. So, you know, they'll work with you if they have any questions or not, but for most instances, they accept the information that is provided for the family. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Correct. We do in financial aid, if we see something weird, like a lot of times students will put in, or parents will put in an extra zero when it's not needed. And with the change of the FAFSA, asset information isn't as heavily weighted in terms of what you might be eligible for in terms of federal and state grants and things like that as it used to.
Yeah.
Not weighted the same anymore.
For parent assets, really, any assets that a parent reports on the FAFSA, it's about 12% of the value of that, and it uses that into calculating the student aid index. For a student, it's a little higher, because the federal government says students' education is their responsibility, not the federal government, to pay for the student's education. So any assets actually belong to the student or in the student's name, other than a 529 college savings plan for a dependent student, that's always considered an asset of the parent. It's about 20% currently is what they look at, okay? The other thing I wanted to mention is Katrina talked about the unusual circumstances, and that's defined by Congress of what stipulations a student may need to meet in order to be considered a special unusual circumstance. But there are things, as I said, the FAFSA is very black and white. You have to give it the information that it's requesting. We have a lot of families that currently in 2023, they had an income of X, but then there have been changes within that family. So somebody could have died, may have lost their job. They may have a new job where they're earning less, all kinds of things that are happening there. Unfortunately, you can't tell that on the FAFSA. You can't attach anything to or add it. So we call those special circumstances, and you need to reach out to the school that the student is looking to attend to let them know that there are changes in your family, and that school will work with you with regard to determine how that may impact that student's eligibility for aid. And every school has their own process, so keep that in mind as well. The other thing is, if you are reporting a change to the school, because the school has the ability to manipulate their institutional formula and the federal formula, unfortunately, the state does not allow anyone to manipulate the state formula other than PHEAA. So you want to make sure you contact PHEAA and let us know that there are changes within your family circumstances so that we can look at that to determine how that may impact the student's eligibility for financial aid. So please keep that in mind as well. Federal work study, I just wanted to say one thing too, is the student would never be paid less than what the minimum wage is. That's required by law. Even though Katrina said, depending on the job that they're taking at the school, they could probably be paid a lot more than that. Most schools, most institutions do pay a student more than what the minimum wage is. With the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, you know, again, the amounts are going to vary based on the schools that participate in that and the funding that they have, but they would never receive more than $4,000 in that program because that's mandated by Congress as well. So it's not like just an open amount that's available to them. And then I did want to make mention of the PLUS loan and the private alternative loans. So I would tell you that if a student needs additional resources, they certainly should look at the federal direct student loan first. It's the easiest and cheapest loan that a student will ever get. No collateral, no credit check. If they want it, they can get it automatically, and the school will work with them with regards to how they apply to that. Now, if you need additional resources and you want to look at that federal PLUS loan, certainly do that. But there is a credit check, as Katrina said. It's not like if you were going to get a mortgage or a car loan where they're going to do a full-blown credit check on the borrower. It's a very lenient credit check. You know, I mean, somebody who has really horrible credit probably would not get a private alternative loan, or it would probably be something with an outrageous interest rate, but they probably could get that PLUS loan. But one of the things that I do want to mention is that if your credit is decent, you have good credit, certainly that PLUS loan is always available to you, but look at the private alternative loans because you're probably going to wind up with a better rate. One of the other things about the private loans, I don't really know of any private loan that charges origination fees or fees. And on that federal PLUS loan, even though it's 9.08% interest rate, there's also 4.228% of fees that are deducted from that. So even though a family could borrow the full balance of what that student may owe under that PLUS loan, they actually have to borrow a little bit more because they deduct that fees from that. So private loans, the interest rate is determined by whoever you're borrowing from. So it could be a bank, a credit union, state agencies like PHEAA. Not everybody has an alternative loan. And then there are some other financial institutions. They're all different. They're not federally regulated or mandated. So you have to look at, the fine print. Make sure you're making a good decision for your family. And I would say that if you are looking at a PLUS loan, please look at the PA Forward. This is offered by Pennsylvania. This loan was designed for Pennsylvania residents only. Student can take these monies anywhere they went or where they go to school. Our interest rate starts at 3.47%, and they're capped at 10.56% currently. We have a student loan, we have a parent loan, we have a graduate loan and a refinance loan. We'll certainly work with you. There's a lot of really nice benefits there that are offered to the student and the family. But I would say talk to us, just compare that to what else is out there, and certainly look at other things. Don't take my word for it, but so that you're making a good financial decision for your families, okay? So I did want to make that mention because this is an alternative loan that's offered through the Commonwealth, and it's really for Pennsylvania residents. And we don't charge any fees or nothing. So whatever you borrow, you get. Yes, sir, you had a question?
Is this for only, it's for PA residents, but can you
take it anywhere.
Virginia?
Yep, take it anywhere you want. Yep. Yep. And the nice thing too is that now, as Katrina said, with the private alternative loans, they're going to do a full-blown credit check. Most students would not get it on their own, but they could get it with a cosigner. So they're probably going to require a cosigner. We have students to apply without a cosigner, and normally we would come back and say, you need to have a cosigner. They would provide that information and we'd move forward. So the nice thing is with the cosigner and each loan is going to be different. Most private alternative loans offer what is called a cosigner release. So for example, ours is after the 48th month payment. So that student is the borrower, you are the cosigner. Student goes into repayment. We'll have a lot of different repayment options that are available to them. Once that student makes that 48th month payment on time, we will look at that record to see if we can release the cosigner. Cosigner is released. That loan now becomes the full responsibility of the student. So if something happened where the student became delinquent or didn't pay on that loan, we would not go after the cosigner. We would go after the student because it's now the student's loan. So keep that in mind, because I have a lot of parents that say, I want to help my kid and all that stuff, but I don't want this in my name. I want it to be in their name. As the Katrina says, the PLUS loan, you own it. Federal government does not allow you to transfer to that student or whatever, and I can't tell you how many families that ever said, well, I did this, but my child's supposed to pay it back. That's the agreement. That's not the way it works. So anyway, just a little bit of tips. I hope you don't mind that I wanted to add in there for clarification, and hopefully that was helpful. So I don't have a lot, because the state process actually is very easy, so I'm going to go through it quickly. So the one thing is that all students, regardless of where they're going to school, whether it's a business or technical school like Westchester, community college, a private school, state-related schools, so like Penn State University, Temple University, Lincoln University, and the University of Pittsburgh are private institutions. They're not owned by the state, but the state actually provides funding to try to keep their costs down. So they're called state-related schools. All of them, oh, that's interesting. Okay.
I remember that last
year. Yeah, hopefully that'll come back, whatever. But you guys have the presentation, and I'll tell you what's going on there. So you have to fill out the FAFSA. So that's the one application that all students need to complete regardless of the type of school. Now, maybe if I switch this, it'll, I didn't know, it must be the link. So the, and you know, there are some private institutions that require that CSS profile. You know, so if a student is looking at a private institution, you know, make sure that you're providing the information on FAFSA requires only and whatever is CSS profile, because it's very, very different. Okay. So for the state as well, students need to complete the FAFSA each year, but first-time applicants, all my seniors, they do need to complete what is called the state grant form as well. They can't do that. It's not out there. It's not available to them. PHEAA actually sends it to them. Once they filed the FAFSA, the federal government processes that. They send that information to the state. So we get a copy of every student's FAFSA here in Pennsylvania. We actually build the state grant record on behalf of the student because a lot of the information the federal government uses, we need as well. Okay. However, because of the way that program is mandated, there are a couple questions, really 6, 7 questions that are required by our legislator where we either have to confirm the information or it's information that we can't get from the FAFSA. So for the first year only, a student would need to complete what is called the state grant form. It's all student information. If we need any parent information, we will request that of the student and let them know exactly what parent information we'd need, and then the student would invite you, the parent, into their application to provide any of that information that we need. So once we receive the FAFSA information from the federal government, we then look at that record to determine what the student's need is and then calculate what their potential eligibility is for the PA State Grant Program. So currently right now, the maximum amount that the student can receive, so we don't have the budget for 25-26 yet, don't know what that's going to be. It's $5,750. And that's for a student who is attending a school in Pennsylvania full-time. If they're going half-time, which is 6 credits, it would be half of whatever the full-time award was, okay? Now, if a student is a Pennsylvania resident eligible for a Pennsylvania grant and going out of state, and we only have 6 reciprocal states, so it's Delaware, District of Columbia, Massachusetts, Ohio, Vermont, and West Virginia, then that student could potentially take a maximum of $600 out of state. That's it. Any other state, so if they're looking at a school in New York or New Jersey or Florida, California, they can't take any state grant money with them from Pennsylvania. Okay, and the minimum award is $500. You know, if the student isn't eligible for that, then they wouldn't be eligible for it. The other thing that I want to make you aware of, because I get this question every year, the state does look at, within their formula, what the cost of attendance is at the school the student is attending. And we have 4 tiers. So basically, you would look at this chart, and it would be community colleges usually fall on the tier 1. Our state schools usually are really tier 2. State-related schools, maybe some business, trade, and technicals could be on tier 3. And always our private schools are always tier 4. Okay, so a student looking at, let's say, you know, a state school and maybe a private school. And each school, when they sent that notification or offer letter out to them, may have an estimated state grant on there. And the student may say, oh, you know, Lehigh University is offering me $5,750, where Westchester's only offering me $4,894, you know, and they think that they're getting more money from Lehigh. Okay, well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, it's because it's based on the school's cost, and Westchester's costs are a lot lower than what Lehigh would be. The maximum award that the student could potentially get at Westchester right now would be that $4,894. So I just want students to be aware when they get those notifications from the different schools, depending on the type of school, their state grant award could be different. And it's not because that school is awarding them more or in that or whatever. It's just the way the formula works. Same thing with the out-of-state. That doesn't really change. Like I said, $600 is unless they're a vet, they can get a little bit more. Okay, we also have a summer grant. So some of our students who are graduating from high school maybe at school in the summer, and if they want, they can apply for the state grant for the summer. It's a separate application. It's all online. It's one pager. It's really easy to fill out. Usually comes out in March. They have all the way up until August 15th to apply for a summer state grant if they want, but it is a separate application along with the FAFSA that they would need to complete that. These are all the other special programs that are available from the state. So as I said earlier, our flagship program is really the state grant program. The majority of our students are receiving funding through that program, but there are some other programs that a student could be eligible for. So if you go out to the PHEAA website under funding opportunities, you are going to see a link for every one of these programs. They all require the FAFSA. In most cases, there is a separate application, but the criteria for these programs is very specific. And it's all outlined in, online on our website, and there's information also in your PA Student Aid Guide if you want to know more about that. But like, for example, the PA Blind or Deaf Higher Education Beneficiary Grant Program, that's a $500 grant for a student who may have a visual or hearing impairment. They file the FAFSA, they apply to that, fill out that form. The only thing they really need to do is apply to us with that is they would just provide documentation on what their visual hearing impairment. A doctor, prescribed that OVR, whoever it may be, and it's pretty easy. So you'll see that there's different criteria. Just looked at that to see if there are any of these programs that a student potentially may meet the criteria. .org. Yep, just go to PHEAA.org. There's a link that says funding opportunities, and they're all listed there, and you can link right into them. Needs to complete, first-year students need to complete the state grant form. And let me just go back one if I can. There we go, okay. They need to complete the state grant form and the high school form. So the way it works is once we get the student's FAFSA, PHEAA will create the record, and then we send a link. There's an email going to be sent to the student. It comes from noreply@grantus@phea.org. That's our system. It literally is 6-7 questions that we ask them. They would answer those questions online, submit it, and they're done. And that's it. Yeah.
So both my daughter and I filled out the FAFSA or whatever. Is that link or whatever coming to her email address?
Yes, all the information always goes to the student.
I looked on her email and...
It's not there yet.
Yeah, okay.
She's a senior?
Yes.
Yeah, so for the 25-26 application year, PHEAA has not opened up the state process yet. We are so students have been filing the FAFSA since November 21st when it opened up, and we're getting those records, and we have them, we're building them, but we have not sent any emails out to any student. No, you didn't miss any. And trust me, we will follow up several times with the student, and they have a long time to be able to complete that process really before that. So the deadline that Katrina talked about for the state grant, I thought I had a slide on that, but maybe I missed it. Just so you know, for returning students and for first-time applicants, that's all my seniors, if they're looking at a degree-granting institution, they have to file the FAFSA by May 1st to be on time. Now, if you know that the student is looking at a business trade or technical school, hospital school of nursing, we have a couple open admissions institutions in Pennsylvania, some 2-year non-transferable programs, because many students make the decisions to attend those types of schools later in the process. They actually have till October 1st to file the FAFSA their first year and be on time for the state, okay? But I usually tell students, just look at May 1st as your deadline, because that's what it is after that.
Just a word of advice, if there's FAFSA or any site that you're going to even application sites, I would just, a word of advice, book and have him or her visit those sites periodically, not rely on notifications.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just putting that out there.
Yeah, the nice thing with studentaid.gov, that's the main website for the federal government. Everything is managed through that website now. So a student would use their FSA ID that Katrina talked about. They would log in, and they actually get to see all the information that's on the federal government. what the status of their FAFSA is, if they had any loans, any types of information. And there's a lot of good resources and things on there. So I really encourage students to go out and visit that.
what's
Same
that
thing with the
website?
parent. It's called studentaid.gov. It's the main website for the parent. Even parents.
They can-
No, there is a parent. When you go on studentaid.gov and you log in as the parent, you're going to see any information. If you participate in a federal loan, if you grant, information as well, you would pull that. You would not see any of the student information because that pertains to them, unless they gave you their information.
Gotcha.
Okay, but these are just the questions that we kind of ask for, you know, the student on that state grant form. And like I said, they have to do that their first year and we roll it over. I want to mention the 529 college savings plans because if you report it, assets on the FAFSA, and a 529 college savings plan is considered an asset for the federal formula, and you reported them out and you have a PA, a Pennsylvania 529 college savings plan, whether it's the guaranteed plan or it's the investment plan, that's one of the questions we ask on the studentaid.gov because we do not consider that under the state formula as a resource when we're determining the student's eligibility for the state grant. And we have no idea. The only way we can get that information is if you tell us. Because when you're reporting assets and investments on the FAFSA, it all gets lumped in. So we have no idea, is that, you know, a stock, is it property, is it a 529 plan, whatever the case may be, okay? And then basically, once the student completes that, they just have to do the rights and responsibilities. It's really, they click a box and then. So I think the other thing that I left here is really just some resources that I put together for you guys. Yeah. So PHEAA.org is, you know, our main website, has a lot of information on there for you. We have lots of free publications, some that are here, but there's a lot more on there to assist and help you with the navigation of financial aid. So please use that. It's all free. And this is where I was saying, this is our main org. And if you look under funding opportunities, if you click on that link, it's going to open up all those special programs. Even information about the state grant is listed on there as well. The other thing is you're going to see under tools, we have a lot of free resources, but we have one for parents and students. So there's like really nice videos, there's one-sheeters, there's publications. It assists students in how do I create an FSA ID? How do I fill out the FAFSA? How do I fill out the state grant form? How do I apply for an outside scholarship? So a lot of good free information that's available for students and families to look at and use. PA Forward information is all out there as well. And then if you want, you have this QR code. If you provide your email information to us, we'll update you on it. You would like that. You don't have to. And then again, contact information. So again, the state process is very simple. For 25, 26, as I said, nothing's happened yet. We're planning on starting to send those emails out to students by the end of this month, but it may happen as early as next week from what I hear. So they're still you know, working on opening up that system. Any questions with regards to maybe state stuff or even anything that Katrina talked about or anything we didn't talk about that we might help you with? Uh-oh.
So the special programs that you were referencing, like the visual or
Right.
hearing impaired and the National Guard, I saw
Right.
them there. Are those only applicable for students attending in-state schools and those few schools like Delaware that are reciprocal schools?
For the
schools that they were not.
For the most part, yes, but some of those programs, like there's the Chaffee program, and that's really a program for students that are aging out of foster care. That's a federal program. The Department of Human Services manages that for the state on behalf of the federal government. So student may be eligible for, you know, some funding from those programs regardless of where they're going to the school. But then we have like what it's called a foster ed program that kind of tags along with that. And that's a state program. So basically what it says to a student is if they are eligible for any Chaffee benefits, they don't have to get a Chaffee grant, okay, but if they're eligible for any of those types of benefits, if the student's attending a school in Pennsylvania, they have to make sure that they have free money, gift money, grant money, scholarship money, you know, that covers their tuition and any mandatory fees. And if it doesn't, then the institution itself would provide the student with additional grant to cover the tuition and the mandatory fees. Now, some schools elect to allow the student to use that funding also to pay for dormitory charges, but that's up to the school. That's not mandated by the state. But it is mandated that they have to cover that student's tuition and fees, and that would only apply to Pennsylvania, not outside.
That's
So,
an excellent point. A lot
yeah.
of the state schools, I know at Westchester, we have a promise program. So if we have students who are aging out of the foster care system and they qualify for Chaffee or foster ed, Westchester will pay for their housing, meal plan, books, and they would also get a stipend.
Yeah. We have like the state work study program. So, you know, like the federal program, student could participate in both if they want. But again, that's only if they're, I think they have to be eligible for grant at the time that they apply. And then it's only for, you know, jobs within the state. They're all listed on our website. So, yes, ma'am.
So we fill out the FAFSA, and then we get this SAI number. Can you give us like an idea of like what is the range of the SAI number? Like what does it all mean?
So currently,
I assume
it's,
you know, you get a number, and above a certain point, well,
yeah.
no way you're going to get needs-based aid. And there's another number below which you for sure will get aid.
It really varies because there's all different types of aid. We really use that SAI number to determine what the student's need is at the schools that they're attending, and that's going to vary based on the cost of attendance of the school the student is attending, so their need could go up and down. But the SAI currently ranges anywhere from a negative 1,500 to 9999999, okay? I would say the lower the number, yes, the more eligibility you will be for federal aid and maybe state and institutional aid. But at some point, yes, SAI may be at a point where a student doesn't have any need and would not be eligible for need-based aid. Doesn't mean they can't still get the unsubsidized federal loan, doesn't mean they can't get merit aid or any of that kind of stuff, outside scholarships and all that. That's not applicable. I don't know what that is because the federal government has such a complex formula now to determine students' eligibility for federal aid, and there are so many variables that go into it. I don't know if there's an SAI yet that I could say, if they're at that 9999, definitely not, you know. I would say if their cost of attendance is, and the SAI are equal, obviously they're not going to have any need at that school because the formula is cost of attendance at the school minus the SAI means this is the need at that student. So I might be looking at community college, maybe their cost is $10,000, you know, and cost is everything. It's tuition fees, living expenses, transport, they put all that in there. It's their sticker price. But if they have an SAI of $10,000, 10,000 minus 10,000 equals 0. So that student wouldn't be eligible for any need-based aid. But if they're in the Westchester, you know, Westchester's cost of attendance may be, I don't know, $3,500 all the way through. I don't even know if it's that high.
So,
You know?
yeah, our cost of attendance, if you're in-state and you're living on campus, in our traditional housing, not the fancy renovated apartment stuff.
That varies.
Housing, it's $25,000. And that's the sticker price, so that includes things that we don't directly bill for, books, personal care, transportation, things like that. Our tuition and fees, just tuition, is $7,716. We have not raised our tuition in 6 years. I do not anticipate that we'll be raising it this year either.
So again, so if you look at that school, if the SAI is below that cost of attendance, there's going to be some need for that student. And that's what the school's going to look at and say, okay, you know, how can we meet this student's need with need-based aid, you know? But they may be able for other things that we're not looking at need. You know, so that student may, if, you know, the school gave them a full tuition scholarship or something like that, or it was $25,000, you know, they would get that regardless. Yep.
Yeah. In previous years, the student aid index or the EFC, we used to say if it was below $6,000, you would get a federal Pell Grant. That's not the case anymore. I've seen students with an SAI, $25,000, getting a federal Pell Grant for 24-25 academic year. So the formula is very complicated in terms of what they're looking at, so it can truly vary. But the need-based aid, that also can vary by the institution.
And there are some federal programs that, depending on a family's circumstance, and I can't remember the correct term, but I'm going to say Hero Scholarship. I don't know if they call it that anymore. But, you know, for an individual who, it's a family member who died in active duty, I think from 2011 through whatever, they're automatic, regardless of what their SAI, they are automatically eligible for whatever the maximum Pell Grant is for that. Now, other need-based aid goes, you know, we have to go through the calculation, but that's mandated by Congress, and we would have to give that to them. So it gets a little bit complex when we start looking at eligibility and what we consider and all of that kind of stuff, you know.
The big thing you want to remember is when you're looking at like schools to compare, especially if you're looking at the cost of attendance, I would double check with their financial aid office. What's the actual cost? What's my out of pocket? That's the term, out of pocket.
Yeah.
Say that to any financial aid professional and they will be impressed, I promise you. Ask for that out of pocket cost, because then you can really compare the schools there. That's what you're going to owe. That's what you would either have to use a payment plan, a 529, or a loan for.
And you may be able to get a lot of that information right on the school's website as well, you know, so. But yeah, it's always good to follow up with the school, you know. And I always say to students, whatever, I mean, if there's a school of choice you really want to go to, and you get the financial aid offer, and you're looking at their cost and aid, and you're trying to figure out how do we do this, and how do we pay any difference or whatever, you know, I would always say give the school the opportunity, you know, call them and just say you're it, but we're just not sure we're going to have how to do this compared to maybe some other like schools and the age you've got with them, because that's where, you know, some of those special circumstances in the family conversations come up, and we don't know that unless you tell us. And sometimes families don't realize, you know, that they should be talking to us about that. I've seen that many times in my experience as a financial aid professional. You know, I'd have conversations with family, and there were things in there that I could take into consideration that sometimes had an impact. Sometimes they don't, you know, because sometimes even though we may consider and agree with your special circumstance, you know, when we recalculate that in the form, it really doesn't change the student's situation, you know, so. And I would never make a family go through providing additional documentation and stuff, you know, if in fact I know it's not going to have any impact or any difference. You know, why would you do that? So, yeah. So I always say give the school the opportunity, have that conversation with them, and make sure that you're, you know, dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's, because sometimes you'd be surprised, you know. So, yeah. So I think we're at time. We did great, you know. Thank you for your questions. They were excellent. Really appreciate that. But again, if I can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Be more than happy to assist you.
And we're going to post both Katrina's and Michael's presentations, as well as there's going to be an additional element that Mike's going to send to me on the high school counseling website. So thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and thank you guys for coming out. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a good night.